What the city is talking about.
The news that impacts you.
Welcome to the Montreal Now podcast.
Gentleman gets arrested. Actually gets sentenced, rather. Let me just kind of fill in the blanks here. Over a road rage incident, right? So what happened was, in a nutshell, he doesn't like the way a motorist is letting him or not letting him merge onto Highway 40. Actually gets out of his car because traffic is not moving, and then has to get back into his car because traffic is moving. But the second time this happens, he gets out of his car again, actually walks up to this other motorist car and punches him in the face. And the sentence? 14 months in jail. Now, as I said when I first mentioned this today, look, doing something like that is incredibly stupid, number one, and dangerous, obviously, number two. But then I thought to myself, boy, it seems to me, maybe I'm wrong, there are people who commit much worse crimes who don't even get close to 14 months in jail. So I thought we'd try to find out a little bit more here because, as I said, you can't condone the behavior, but I'm wondering, a 14-month sentence, and my understanding, by the way, is this gentleman had no priors. He didn't have, I could be wrong, but from what I've seen, no other criminal issues in his past. So Avi Levy is co-founder of Ticket 911, is on the phone. Avi, thanks for taking the time.
Thank you.
Can I just ask right off the top, in hearing this story and hearing the sentence today, what your general reaction was to this?
Well, I'm not entirely surprised. I mean, road rage is an issue. Assault is a problem. The judge wanted to transmit a clear message, and I think he did, that this is basically not acceptable in the society that we live in. And 14 months in jail is the sentence that he came down with. And unless that's going to be appealed, that's pretty much going to be what the accused is going to serve.
Okay, but when I ask you, you deal with people, I mean, I know it's called Ticket 911, but you deal with people who have, various issues as far as, driving is concerned. Had you ever, and this can't be the first case of road rage that you've, heard about or had to deal with, have you ever seen a sentence this severe in the past?
I have not seen a sentence this severe for this set of facts, but it doesn't really surprise me. Like I say, there's two reasons for a judgment. There's two motives for a judgment to come down. One of the motives is to punish the act that was committed. And the other motive is to dissuade people or the public from doing something like this by saying, holy cow, this guy got 14 months in jail for punching somebody in a road rage incident. But the judge clearly was not happy with the behavior and certainly doesn't want to condone the behavior and wants to send a clear message that if you do this, you're going to pay a price, and it could be a high price, in this case, 14 months in jail.
Do cases like this, from what you know, typically end up in court?
If there is a criminal act, if there is assault, yes. If the police are called, yes. Sometimes the police are not called or don't get there in time. But in this case, the gentleman that got hit pressed charges, and that's what the judge's decision was. So a little bit surprising because 14 months is a lot. And like you mentioned, if it was a fight on the street, I don't know that he would have gotten 14 months. But I think the underlying message here is really that road rage is not acceptable. I mean, there are cases in the past where road rage caused death because they were driving like crazy, and then there was a car accident, and then one individual that was running away died, and the individual that was chasing him was charged with manslaughter. So there are some cases that are pretty, drastic, and the decisions are trying to stop this behavior. Is the only explanation that I can come up with for 14 months in jail.
By the way, I'm reading the judge's decision here, at least part of it. So the judge, Denny, and you may know this judge, by the way, he was involved in another case having to do with the language laws. But Judge Dennis Galiatsados, he said, violence can be neither a solution to this problem nor a way to express frustration, and then sentence him to 14 months in jail. Avi, I guess I would ask you, and I mentioned this off the top as well, I think we've all done, and I speak for myself, there are some things that I'm not really proud of sometimes when I'm driving, that I do, but it never escalates beyond just, looking at someone else and trying to understand why someone is driving, so badly, or what they're doing when they think they're driving, because sometimes they're staring at a screen, not paying attention. There's a lot of frustration involved. I get that. At what point, if you find yourself in a situation like that, outside of flipping someone the bird, You're not going to get in trouble for that. But what is it you want to know? Is the idea of just getting out of your car at all just a bad idea?
I think that getting out of your car is not a good idea at all, because I think that's where the problems begin. And then it's a question of, nerves and stress and, reactions, and it usually goes downhill from there. So like you said, not a good idea to get out of the car. Sometimes flipping somebody the bird is not a good idea either. Some people don't take that very well. But, I get it. Driving in traffic with everything else, with the stresses of life, get to people. But the message that the judge wanted to relay to the public is that it's not acceptable, and they made an example, I think, out of this gentleman.
By the way, so when we talk about getting out of the car, if a police, just in the case where a police car was there, an officer was there, and you decided to do that before it even got out of hand, if it got to that point, that in and of itself, could that be ticketed?
Yeah, getting out of your car and leaving your car in the middle of the road for no reason could most definitely be ticketed.
Mm-hmm. You ever dealt with a case like this or anything close to this in the past?
My partner was driving not too long ago, and he saw an incident of road rage where two people were quite annoyed at each other, and one guy got out of his car, ran up to the other guy's car, headbutted the windshield twice, didn't break the windshield, got back into his car, and left. So there's some pretty wild and crazy things that can happen when you start getting out of your car with road rage incidents. And I don't recommend it, because you never know who you're dealing with and what kind of day they had.
Yeah, well, there is that. I'm wondering, too, if you've seen, like in the case you mentioned of your partner, if you see something like this going on, you're obviously a little concerned. And if it doesn't just happen quickly and then they leave, should you call police?
You can call the police. You probably should call the police. And then the police, if they get there in time, will deal with it. Bystanders usually do end up calling the police. Nowadays, with cell phones, people are filming, everything gets caught on camera. So the proof is not going to be, I think, that difficult. Some people even have cameras in their car that record everything. So that's why you're getting to see more and more of these road rage incidents and the footage behind it, because everything is getting recorded.
Just as a final question, so you mentioned, so he's getting 14 months. You said he can appeal, or what's the next process here as far as you know?
Well, they usually have 30 days in which to appeal the decision, and then if they don't, the decision stands, and if they do, well, the decision could be revised downwards or canceled, depending on what the grounds for the appeal are. Okay. But I think what we need to retain out of this is really the message, notwithstanding if there is an appeal or not. I think the message is clear, and that is that the judges will not accept this and will punish it, maybe not always as severely, but definitely they don't approve of this.
By the way, if it was to appeal, does it go back before the same judge, or is that a guarantee or not?
No, it would go back. It would go back in front of the same court, usually in front of a different judge.
Okay. Well, we shall see. Avi, appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Always a pleasure. Thank
Avi
you.
Levy over at Ticket 911. Again, gentlemen, in a road rage incident, 14 months is his sentence after walking up and punching another guy in the face because he didn't like how the other guy was driving. 14 months.
Bringing you the breaking news and the people making it. Montreal Now with Aaron Rand. CJAD 800.
Dr. Joe Schwarcz joining us right now, as he does every Tuesday afternoon. And Joe, we kind of left this hanging about a week or so ago, or a couple of weeks ago, right? I came across a story and we said we'll talk about it later on. So let's start with that. The headline says, erectile dysfunction drug Viagra has surprising new health benefit and could help millions of people as they age. So I'm guessing the people it's going to help are not about, help in the bedroom. I'm guessing it's about something else. Actually, I know it is because the story is talking about osteoporosis. So what's this about?
Right. I think that they talked about the study so that they could have the captivating headline about Viagra stiffening bones. Mm-hmm. Right. Well, anyway, Viagra, of course, is a very interesting substance. It was originally put on the market as an angina medication because it dilates blood vessels. And it turned out that people who had been taking Viagra found this rather interesting side effect. And of course, Pfizer, the manufacturer, immediately capitalized on that, and it became one of the best-selling drugs. The name of it is actually interesting, how it was arrived at. Do you know that?
No. I don't.
Well, it comes from Vitality, and they wanted to make it sound very powerful, and Niagara Falls, it just exudes power.
Is this true?
So they combined Vitality and Niagara, and they got Viagra.
Oh,
okay, now the study that you're talking about is another interesting side effect observation, is that people who were taking Viagra turned out to have stronger bones. Now, supposedly these were people who were being monitored for osteoporosis and also happened to be taking Viagra. So that's how this came to light. And osteoporosis, of course, is a weakening of the bones, and it increases the risk of falls. And, of course, that's a huge problem. Many senior citizens start the downward slide with a fall. Mm-hmm. And then they don't quite recover from that, and everything cascades downhill. So anything that reduces that risk is great. So they made this observation. Now, of course, this does not mean that Viagra is going to be prescribed generally to prevent osteoporosis. That's not what this means. It was just an interesting observation that people who are already taking Viagra may benefit from this.
Yeah, but why wouldn't it, Joe, if that's the case? If it does spur bone growth, skeletally...
Because there are many other drugs that are prescribed for that, which have a long history of use and a long history of success. So eventually, it may be, but that needs long-term trials, more than just an observation of people who already have been taking Viagra. And I'm sure that they're looking into that now, because obviously this is the reason to market Viagra. So far, it's an interesting observation that people who are taking Viagra reduce the risk of osteoporosis. And maybe it will translate to prescribing Viagra just for that. But that's going to take a while before that is determined, because there already, as I said, there are a number of medications that are already in use for that purpose.
By the way, I should point out, and I read this in the piece as well, the idea is, just to take Viagra for the sake of taking it, just because you want to try it, is not a good idea, right?
It's not a good idea. Well, first of all, it's a prescription drug. Although, these days people get around that because you can order it on the internet.
Right.
But no, this is not something that should be taken without the advice of a physician, because like any other medication, it can have side effects. Sometimes it can have serious side effects.
Okay. Second story you want to get to today, you say you want to talk about a company that can take sugar out of orange juice.
Right. This is very interesting because someone brought to my attention an Instagram video about a company that claims to be able to make sugar vanish from orange juice. So when I first started looking at that, I said, gee, this is probably going to be another one of those hokey Instagram videos full of misinformation and hype. Turns out actually not to be the case. It's about an Israeli company called Blue Tree, who actually has developed a process for removing some of the sugar from orange juice without adding anything to it. Now, orange juice contains several different kinds of sugar. Half of the sugar in orange juice is sucrose, that's ordinary table sugar. The other half is a mixture of glucose and fructose, which are also sweet sugars. And they have developed this process whereby they take orange juice and pass it through a sequence of filters. The first filter removes pulp, and the second and third filters are made of materials called zeolite and ion exchange resin, which can actually remove the sucrose and leave behind the glucose and the fructose. So they are actually capable of removing half of the sugar from orange juice. And, of course, this is something that certainly does have a positive connotation, because we know that we want to be cutting down on the amount of sugar that we consume. The current recommendation is that the amount of sugar, free sugar that we should be taking every day is about 40 grams. And a glass of orange juice has 20 grams of sugar. That's a lot of sugar. So if you can cut that in half by removing the sucrose, you're doing a good thing. And of course, you're also cutting down on the calorie count. So they have now gone to the pilot plant stage where they're actually producing some of this reduced sugar orange juice, and they're test marketing it in Latin America and in Asia. Now, we'll see where this goes, because, of course, when you remove half of the sugar, you're also removing some sweetness. But still, the glucose and the fructose, which make up half the sugar in the orange juice, get left behind. So there still will be some sweetness. The question of whether or not people are going to notice that difference in sweetness. One thing that they will notice is the difference in price, because obviously this treated orange juice goes through this special processing, so it will cost more. But it turns out that this video, which I thought was going to be another one of these scam videos, isn't. It actually describes a very legitimate company carrying out this. Now, whether or not this is really important, that's a different question, because about 5 oranges go into a glass of orange juice, right? That's a lot of sugar. So why not just counter this by skipping the orange juice and eating an orange instead? You will have fiber in there, you will have minerals in there, and you will have much, much less sugar. And, people don't realize how much sugar there actually is in orange juice. They don't even realize how much sugar there is in soft drinks. But the fact is that the amount of sugar in orange juice is equivalent to what you have in a soft drink.
What's a can of Coke, Joe, for calories? You've brought this up before. Or for grams of sugar, rather. Yeah,
it has about, depending on the size of the can, it has 25 grams of sugar in a small can, and there's 39 grams of sugar in what now is the regular can of Coke. That is the sugar allotment for a whole day. That's a lot of sugar. And orange juice has also the same amount of sugar, but of course, at least when you're drinking orange juice, you're also getting some minerals, and
By the way, just to explain for people who wonder, when you're talking about oranges, we're talking about just the oranges made into juice. We're not talking about added sugar afterwards. This is just the sugar that lives in oranges.
This is just taking 5 oranges, squeezing it to get a glass of orange juice.
Okay.
That will give you, depending on the oranges, will give you 20 to 25 grams of sugar in there. That's a lot of sugar.
Yeah.
And people overdo the juice consumption because they think that somehow orange juice, even though it has sugar, it doesn't really matter because it's natural. Well, all sugar is natural.
Sugar is sugar
right?
is sugar, right?
Sugar comes from sugar cane or sugar beets or oranges. It doesn't matter.
Okay, we leave it at that. Good advice. And by the way, I would imagine if they could do this and pull it off and it becomes scalable, you could have other fruit perhaps and do the same thing, right? Other juices?
Absolutely.
Right.
And they're also working on milk and beer to remove the sugar, because milk, of course, also contains sugar. It contains a lot of lactose. And there are already technologies to remove that, but this would be another one. And beer, of course, also contains sugar, which adds to the calories.
Beer contains sugar?
Yes, beer contains sugar, naturally occurring sugar, yes, not added sugar. Yeah.
Okay. How many grams of sugar in a regular bottle of beer, as an example?
Oh, less than orange juice. There would be 5 to 10 grams.
Okay.
So it's still a significant amount.
Especially if you have 5 or 6 of them, I guess.
Yeah.
All right, Joe, thank you.
The very latest news, reported and discussed. Welcome back to Montreal Now on CJAD 800.
Patrice Brunet is in studio. Thank you for coming in.
Hi.
You're an immigration lawyer. We were just talking before this aired. And I guess my first question here is, you heard the sister-in-law say she was there legally. So she'd been in Florida. She'd been living there for a while. She's running a business out of there while waiting for her visa to be renewed. Ordinarily, that's not reason to be detained by ICE because she has done nothing wrong in this particular case. But then what happened was, the story I understand is she got into a bit of a scrap with her husband. He ended up calling the police. There was some kind of, back and forth. So now she has been charged with something. And in this case, I think she said it was a misdemeanor. And that in and of itself is reason for her to be detained by ICE?
Could be. We don't know. We don't have all the details. But when you're facing criminal charges and you're not a permanent resident or a citizen of the United States, they can detain you until they try to resolve it and find out. And you have to remember, President Trump has enunciated some targets for ICE agents. They have to detain 3,000 persons per day. So they have targets.
So you're saying they're being more vigilant now than they've ever been in the past.
I wouldn't use the word vigilant. I would use other words that are much more dangerous.
Okay.
It's not about vigilance. It's about, just, I think it was yesterday, ICE agents just went into a park in Los Angeles.
Yeah, grab a whole bunch.
And grab a whole bunch. So you have to be very careful if you're not a citizen of the United States when you are in the United States. And, I don't want to scare everybody here. This is not a situation in the U.S. where they're just going to detain everybody. But we are in a vulnerable situation when we're not Americans on American soil in these times.
So let's say you are, in fact, a Canadian. You want to go Florida, wherever else you want to go to. So you have a passport as a Canadian passport. You need to get a work permit to work in the U.S. The suggestion is maybe it's better to apply for that here before you get there and apply for it there. Is that a point?
Well, it's not.
How does it work?
It's not all work permits that can be applied at the border, but a lot of them you can apply at the border. So there are two ways that you can apply at the border if you're applying for a work, like a TN visa, for example, which is under the CUSMA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, or Canada-U.S. Mexico Agreement. You can either apply at the border, or you can apply through a processing center. But we always send our clients at the border. Now, you can either drive up to Lacolle, but if you do that, you're on U.S. soil when you're applying. So if something goes wrong, they can detain you there. If you're applying at Trudeau Airport, at what we call pre-flight inspection, you are in Dorval. You're in Quebec. You're in Canada. You're not on U.S. territory. This is not an embassy. This is not. So if something goes wrong, the worst thing that can happen to you is that you do a 180 and you go back home
to where you were.
So they can't detain you. They don't have the power to detain you.
Okay.
So that's one of the things that we advise our clients. If there's a gray area, just take a flight to the U.S. and don't apply at the border.
So when you say take a flight at the U.S., so clear U.S. customs while you're still in Montreal.
That's right.
Do whatever you have to apply to here, and if it doesn't work, at least you don't end up being detained. You can just go back home.
That's correct.
Okay. In this case that you heard now, the one we've been describing, you also may have heard the woman saying, her sister-in-law saying, they've spent thousands to try to get something done here. Nothing seems to be working.
Yeah. I can't comment on what they've done, what they should have been doing. But clearly, she's been in the U.S. for a few years, this lady who's been detained for the past 4 months. She's been in the U.S., presumably on a valid work permit, and she was in the process of renewing it. Maybe she missed the deadline. Maybe other things happened, and that's the reason why they detained her, and there was something unclear about her status. Maybe it was about the misdemeanor charge. Maybe it was about something else.
Okay.
There's a lot of things we don't know here.
Yeah, I get it. And I asked you as
4
well,
months
though,
is long.
I asked you as well, the idea that, she's been there for a couple of years. She'd applied for her visa, waiting for it to be renewed. She's been charged by someone. There's a domestic issue here, right? Her and her husband had a bit of a tiff, whatever. By virtue just of that, the fact that there's now a criminal charge against her by her husband, that's the determining factor here, because without that, nothing else would be a problem here. She's not even been found guilty of anything. She's just been charged by someone she was having, and still this is where she ended up. That seems kind of extreme.
It is. And that's how vulnerable we all are when we don't have U.S. citizenship on U.S. soil. You could be detained, and by the time you go through all the hoops, weeks, months can go by. We don't have the same in Canada. In Canada, they won't detain you for these types of things.
Okay.
But in the U.S., that's a reality today.
By the way, the rest of the story says, and we got to wrap up, but it says at least 50 Canadians have been detained by ICE. You've heard other stories like this.
Well, those stories have been reported in the media over the past few months. Now, to put that in context, I think it's the Canadian Embassy in the U.S. that stated that about 50 Canadians is not something that is unusual year on year. But of course, under this U.S. administration's policies, these problems come to light a lot more than they used to in the past. Now, out of those 50, there's one that was reported last week who had criminal records and who was dealing drugs. So that's, those are separate issues.
I guess the advice here is from an immigration lawyer, just be careful, be extra careful, because these kinds of things could happen. They are happening. Yeah.
When my clients ask me about these things and, these stories come up and they cross a border and they apply for work permits and they ask me for my advice. And I say, you can keep going to the U.S., but always be extremely respectful with the immigration officers. Don't have an attitude. You don't have the right to enter the U.S. It's a privilege. You have to check all the boxes for them to admit you, and just be respectful. And if the agent doesn't want you to get to the U.S. to enter their country, then just say, "Thank you, officer. Go back home."
All right. We'll leave it at that. Patrice Brunet, thank you so much for coming in.
Because you don't want to miss a thing. Montreal Now on CJAD 800.
Causes of colon cancer in young adults. Going up inexplicably. And, the part that really kind of stood out to me, Chris, is where it talks about what we'd ordinarily talk about with, risks of colon cancer, which would be, for example, diet, right? And perhaps weight, maybe. Yep. But in these particular cases, and there's an example here of a man, 30 years old, it's the one they start with in the article, in great shape, not overeating, has a good diet, all that kind of stuff, at 30, and gets diagnosed with colon cancer. So how prevalent is this, and why is this happening?
Yeah, so here's the thing. We have to put a little bit of nuance, and some of the headlines and some of the language they use in the article may be not entirely accurate. Like when they talk about rates of colon cancer skyrocketing, I think that's a bit of a misrepresentation of what's actually going on. So here's the thing. Colon cancer overall is actually decreasing in this country, as it is in most of the developed world, because we have gotten very, very good at cancer screening, right? We do either colonoscopies or fecal occult blood testing. We remove polyps before they turn into cancer. So overall, colon cancer is going down. And in the group of people 50 and over who make up the vast majority of colon cancer cases by like a factor of 8 to 1, colon cancer rates are going down. Why people are talking about this and why they're able to generate these types of headlines is because when you break it down in people under 50 versus over 50, the people who are under 50, who still represent the minority of cases, have been seeing a bit of an uptick in colon cancer over the past 20 years. So it's not as if this has happened suddenly. It's been a slow, steady increase over the past couple of decades to the order of about a 2.8% increase. And that's the number we've been seeing in Canada. In other countries across the world, it's actually been a little bit worse. It's about the same in the U.S. at 2.1%, much higher in Puerto Rico at 3.8%, the U.K. is 3.6%. So all this to say is that you are seeing an increase in colon cancer in younger people. I think a lot of it is explainable by the things that you mentioned: diet, rising rates of obesity, especially in younger people, the fact that younger people are not usually included in cancer screening programs, so you're not going to pick up these cancers earlier and treat them earlier. So I think a lot of this is explainable, and it's not as much as a mystery as some people would like to make it out to be.
Okay, well, let me go to a couple of things here. I'll tell you what stood out to me. There's one of the sentences here says, everyone born after 1960 has a higher colon cancer risk than previous generations. That in and of itself is concerning, is it not?
It is, except that it depends how you define colon cancer, right? Because everybody born after 1960 probably became part of a colon cancer screening program where you had, either blood tests, fecal occult blood testing or colonoscopies. So you're going to pick up more colon cancer just by virtue of the fact that you screened for it, whereas previously a lot of it would go undiagnosed. So yes, you are going to detect more colon cancer just by virtue of the fact that you have better screening. You're just going to catch it early and prevent it from metastasizing and turning into a fatal case of colon cancer. But part of it is reflected in the fact that our lifestyle, the fact that we eat more processed foods, the fact that we move less, the fact that we're seeing rising rates of obesity, all of that is contributing as well. So there are two competing forces at work here. One of it is a force for good, that we are much better at screening and treating colon cancer than we've ever been. But part of it is our lifestyle is maybe a little bit worse than it was a generation ago, and that's the part that really needs to be focused on and fine-tuned.
So let me ask one other thing here, and I know this is a U.S. figure, but it says that back in 2021 in the U.S., right, they moved the age of recommended colon cancer screening from 50 to 45. What have we done here in Canada?
We've been staying at that. Now, colon cancer screening is always, and with every cancer screening, it's always an interesting problem because you could say that, well, why wouldn't we liberalize the guidelines to catch more of these people? But let me give you some numbers here, just because, if there's one thing that people love when they hear about health, it's hearing about statistics. I firmly believe that. The rate of colon cancer in the people over 50 is about 117 per 100,000, whereas it's only 13 per 100,000 in the younger people. So it really is almost less common by a factor of 10. If you were to implement a colon cancer screening for the younger population, it would invariably become more inefficient. That's not to say it wouldn't work and it wouldn't be a good idea, but it would cost more for a lot less return on investment. And now you're getting into a much more complicated question about, healthcare utilization spending and resource allocation. Like, do you want to spend resources on this as opposed to something else? The younger you push the age cutoffs, the less useful they become because the fewer and fewer people have colon cancer. And even with this 2.8% increase in younger people, they still represent a very tiny minority of all colon cancer cases. And that's where this becomes very challenging, which is, can you lower it to 45? I suppose you could. But then how far down do you want to push it? Do you push it down to 40 or 35? If we keep seeing an increase in the prevalence in younger people, then yeah, maybe it does make sense to push it down a little bit. And those numbers are always going to be a little bit fluidic and a little bit arbitrary based on where the cost effectiveness analyses lie.
So just a final question from a doctor's point of view here. When is a recommendation for someone to go for a colon cancer check, test, et cetera?
For the general population, probably be in their 50s. But if you have high-risk features, if somebody in your family had colon cancer, and especially if there's a genetic condition that leads to colon cancer, of which there are many, that's an indication to start earlier. And so that's the thing. Even guidelines, when you have these ages of 50 or 45, those don't necessarily apply to you.
Okay.
Your individual risk may justify starting earlier.
Is one of them, by the way, because I know in the story he talked about having a stomachache that went on for a month. I mean, obviously that's a concern. That's something you want to follow up on?
Exactly, but that's not screening. Screening means taking an asymptomatic population and doing tests on everybody, even if they feel fine. The minute you have symptoms, go get testing because those symptoms might be driven by something else.
Dr. Chris Labos, is always appreciated. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Take care.
Right.
Bringing you the breaking news and the people making it. Montreal Now with Aaron Rand. CJAD 800.
I think it's fair to say artificial intelligence and the need to adopt it across multiple industries in this country and government as well has never been more in focus than it is right now under our new Prime Minister, Mark Carney. And to that end, Canada now has its first ever AI minister. His name is Evan Solomon, and he is on the line. Evan, thank you so much for being, Minister, thank you so much for being here.
Well, first of all, good to be back. How are things? How's everybody? I miss the old conversations, and it's fantastic to be in Montreal on a really important day.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that first, and then we'll come back and talk about what it's like, doing what you're doing. You're in Montreal. You launch an investment of nearly how much? $100 million? What's this about?
Yeah, so nearly $100 million, and I want people to know this is done through something called Scale AI. And what the government does is we want to build in this crisis. Look, we all know we're in an economic crisis, and we all know that we got to build the economy of the future. And in order to do that, we need to invest in the people who are taking risks and building the economy of the future. And Montreal is a absolute center of innovation and entrepreneurship. So we had Startup Fest in the morning where you saw some of the best, coolest, most successful startup companies in Montreal. And then we went to Scale AI and we announced projects of close to $100 million in 23 different companies. And what these companies are doing are building the economy of the future. They're using AI to drive productivity, to create new jobs. And I can tell you something. I just finished touring a place called Hypertech. This is a company in Montreal that has been 40 years in the making, and they are a global leading data center company. So what people may not know is the world is coming to places like Montreal and Canada, but we need to support those companies to use AI, and that's what we invested in today. And we are really proud to do that because we need to invest in the economy of the future, especially right now, to keep jobs in Canada.
I mentioned, of course, the Prime Minister has made a very, regular point of bringing this up and talking about how important it is. And it's worth mentioning as well, certainly given what the story was this week about cuts that are being demanded by the public sector, by the Prime Minister. How is AI going to play out, Evan, just in terms of the government itself using AI?
Look, the government's got to walk the walk. We can't ask industry to use AI to find productivity, to create new jobs, and not use the tools ourselves, and we are using them. The government has to be as efficient as anyone else. The citizens, the voters, people listening, people in their cars right now. By the way, I'm in traffic just like probably half the people listening to you right now. But people want to make sure that our government is lean and efficient. And using the tools of AI is part of that. But you've got to first get the infrastructure right. And I just want people to recognize that, using AI is a tool that's useful if it's driving productivity, if it's making your business better, if it's helping people do their jobs in a better way. You have to adopt it for a purpose. And sometimes there's barriers for small, medium-sized businesses, most of our businesses. I'll give you an example. That's why earlier this month, we announced something called the Compute Access Fund. That means that anybody listening who works in a small or medium-sized business, they may need to say, well, I'd love to use AI, but I don't have access to compute that can use it. Well, this fund allows companies to apply to get access to use that AI so they can see it in action. So the government's got to do that. Companies are doing that. And this is part of this age of the entrepreneur, that inside big companies and outside, these are just tools that are needed and being used to drive the economy of the future. And that's really what the AI is all about. And that's why the Prime Minister made a new ministry, the Minister of AI and Digital Innovation, so we can use these tools in the service of Canada and Canadian jobs.
I heard, I think it was Harley Finkelstein at Shopify a while ago, suggest that, governments, and Mark Carney was not at the time the Prime Minister, but just in general, the governments were not necessarily promoting business. So like Shopify is a major global player. And the complaint was, we're too conservative in promoting these sorts of Canadian businesses. Is that something that's going to change under you?
Yeah, and full disclosure, I know Harley Finkelstein very well, and he's a brilliant entrepreneur. And he's driving the age entrepreneur. Shopify is a crown jewel in the Canadian firmament of innovation companies. And he's 100% right. Part of what Mark Carney wants to do is support people that take risks, support innovators. I spent the first 10 years of my life building a company as an entrepreneur, and I really appreciate how hard it is, the risks it takes. These are people who are betting, their families are along for this risky ride for them, and it is difficult. And we've got to support the people who are building the companies of the future. And the only way to do that is to make sure that they've got access to the right tools. And it's 2025, and many of the tools you need to build are AI. And that's why we're driving this kind of adoption.
I would ask one other thing. We talk about, Canada and the fact that we're conservative and that we have to sort of get over that and actually push this. Do you think Canada can be a global player on the AI stage?
Yeah, you know what? I think you've raised a great point, and I'm super glad you did. I actually think the perception of Canada as risk-averse is not true. If you look at Montreal, look at Quebec, it was founded by risk-takers. It is founded, the Northwest Company is a risk-taking, disruptive company in the fur trade. Canada's history is of people who have fought against big barriers to build one of the greatest countries in the world. So we are risk-taking. We are entrepreneurial. We are innovative. Just think about AI, the three great godfathers of AI, right here, Yoshua Bengio and Mila at the Institute here in Montreal that we're so proud of. Geoffrey Hinton in Toronto at Vector, who won the Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, Yoshua Bengio won the Turing Prize. That is like the Nobel Prize of AI. And in Alberta as well. So, this idea that Canada is not ready to be the innovators, we're not just ready. We are the innovators. We are leading. The challenge is not to be innovators. The challenge is to keep the innovation in Canada and to grow it. That's what our mission is in this digital revolution, this AI revolution.
So a lot of the issue has been as well the idea in the past that, there's been too much bureaucratic red tape, and I know that's been talked about as well as something that has to change. Is that changing? How hard is that going to be to change?
Well, look, I think the Prime Minister's been pretty clear that we've got to simplify. Part of my job as well is, one of the reasons why I talked about that Compute Access Fund, to give companies access to the possibility that they can use this technology, is because we need to tell our story and communicate in a simpler, better way. And you're right. We've got to cut red tape. The Prime Minister's done that. I think people recognize that on July 1st, when he broke down all federal barriers to interprovincial trade, making good on that Kane promise, that was one of the first times we've seen on a very big level a Prime Minister that's saying, yeah, we can cut through red tape. We can get things done. And Prime Ministers have tried to do that for generations, and he did it by July 1st. I think you're seeing provinces work together in a way they never have, partly because of his leadership, partly because of the crisis we're in, partly because we all know we need to do that. So you're 100% right, and I think we've seen the best example of that on July 1st, and you'll see a lot more of that.
Evan, when we talk about this $100 million today that is going to be invested here, what's the breakdown in private and public here? Because people say it's one thing for the government to spend the money, but private industry has to be here, private investment has to be here. Are you seeing that?
Yeah, great question. Every dollar that Scale AI, which is our AI cluster, invests in a company, they get $2 invested by the private markets.
Okay.
So literally, it's a 2-to-1 ratio. You're putting $1 in, and that's just the beginning of the multiplier. Then 100%, you get $2 in on private investment, but then you get multiples. Jobs are created, spin-offs are created. So what you're doing is you've got to create that flywheel of innovation. That's what any great country is doing. They're trying to create these clusters and these where you have enough of an ecosystem that it starts generating more jobs. So that's why the core investment here, and I want to make sure people understand this. This isn't Oprah. No one's giving away money. These companies that apply for this money go through a rigorous diligence process. I spoke to a company today that went through 8 months. They applied, they were rejected. They reapplied, they were rejected. They reapplied because they had to get the diligence right. We have teams of engineers at Scale AI going through these proposals to make sure that they're rigorous, they have application, and they're driving real results and investment.
Evan, just as a final question, I'd be remiss, obviously, if I didn't bring up the elephant in the room, which is the United States and tariffs, and of course, digital services tax was an issue a couple of weeks ago. How much? And you don't really know how this is going to play out because Donald Trump can change his mind and has from Monday to Tuesday. How much of a potential problem does that pose, and what sort of factors have been addressed so far?
It's no secret that we're living in a moment where we have a political realignment going on. Like, we see it every day. Just look at your social media. And you said it really well. The United States is still our biggest trading partner, but in many ways, it's significantly less reliable than it once was. The Prime Minister's very first trips overseas were to France and the UK. Why? Because we got to drive in new trade partners. And we have to make sure that we're less reliant just on one trading partner. So, yeah, for sure that's driving a lot of this. And that's framing this crisis that we're in, which is we can no longer just be passive about our trade and our economy. We have to build an economy with other countries that share our values. And I've said, our mission here is AI sovereignty. If you are not building the AI economy of the future, if you're not on that bulldozer, you're part of the road. So we've got to invest in it and build in it. And that means new partnerships. I will say that, I'll give you an example. In Quebec, right here in Montreal, you had 250 Canadian companies, many from Montreal, I think more than 100 from Quebec or more, in France at the largest AI conference in Europe, Canada was the country of the year. I went over there. Scale AI did it as well. And Canadian companies were doing business across Europe. And you saw that to expand our trade because the situation in North America is changing. And we better get off our butts and make sure that we're trading with the rest of the world. The good news here is when people around the world see Canadian innovation and companies, you wouldn't, like I've seen it with my own eyes, it's world leading, it's world class. And we have this opportunity, we cannot lose it. So we've got to double down on our leadership in this sector around the world. And that's what we got to do. And that's part of my mission. And that's part of why I'm here to meet the companies and the innovators that are doing that, and we need to invest in them to make sure that they've got the opportunity to capitalize. That's how we're going to build an economy for everyone in the future.
Evan, I'm going to let you go, but I'm going to ask you to just take off your ministerial hat for a second. I mean, let's face it, people will know you. We talk on the air. You've been a journalist for many, many years, and now all of a sudden you're Minister of AI. What's that transition been like for you? You wake up and hit yourself and go, am I dreaming?
You know what? It's a great question, and first of all, I love our conversations, and the audience at CJAD has been so incredible. But you know, I had been working in the United States, and when Trump came in, I realized it was time to come home, and I really believe that we had the right leader at the right time in the right fight, and I had the opportunity to come home and try to throw my hat in the ring because I saw right up close, living in the United States, what was going to happen, and it was time to stand up with Canada. And I will tell you, millions and millions of Canadians feel the same way. It crosses partisan. It doesn't matter how you vote. Canadians are standing up for this country and building this country, and it's a unique moment in our history. And you and I have been covering stuff like this for many years. I don't know if I've ever seen a moment where the entire country recognizes what's at stake, and we've all got to lean in and get into the fight. And it is uncorking an optimism and a resilience and a toughness and a gutsiness that has always been here, but I think now we're seeing it for the first time really out loud. And I think it's why I jumped into the ring, and I being in this fight with Canadians has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. You know, I have 2 kids, so you got to,
Yeah, perspective. Yeah.
Perspective on this.
Evan, I want to thank you so much for the time. First of all, I'm happy. I'm thrilled for you. I think it's wonderful, and it's great to know you. You know, you're going to be out there and you're going to be implementing change. I wish you the best of luck. I hope we can chat again.
Yeah, anytime. Always love our conversations, and you're going to grill me like you've grilled everyone else, so I always appreciate it. Thanks, man.
Evan Solomon, our Minister of Artificial Intelligence, really appreciate the time.
This has been the Montreal Now podcast.
Listen live on your radio weekday afternoons from 2 to 6
on CJAD 800
or through the iHeartRadio app.